welcome to our special Earth Day event. Now, we've got a super exciting panel for you today, but before we start, I'll just say a couple of things in case you've not been to one of our events before. Now, on your screen over on the right, you'll see a chat box. Please pop your questions in there, and we will get to as many as we can during the time. And also, if you have any technical problems, please don't worry too much, because you will be able to catch up afterwards. So with that, I will hand over to Gail.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everybody. I am Gail Whiteman, Professor of Sustainability at the University of Exeter Business School. Happy Earth Day. Earth Day is, I'm a Canadian originally, and Earth Day has been a big celebration in North America for a long time. It's certainly picked up pace in the UK and throughout Europe and the rest of the world. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be moderating what I hope is an interesting and provocative session on finance. And can it be the solution we need for planet Earth? So I'm going to start off with my first guest, Mr. Ray Durrani. Now, Ray is the head of sustainable finance in the green economy at WWF UK. I'm going to turn it over to Ray in a second, but I just wanted to say that, you know, it's an interesting thing we're going to be looking at today. We know that money can't buy us love, but the question outstanding is, can it buy us a better world? So Ray, over to you. So before I ask you any questions, I want you to tell me one fun fact about finance and sustainability.
Sure, Gail. And thanks for having me, everyone. And apologies, I have to leave after before the panel and before the screening today. But I leave you in very capable hands of a fellow Canadian, I have to say. So I didn't know that, Gail, and that we share the same homeland, which is great. And yeah, fun fact about sustainable finance is that I think that this year and sort of the last full year, we've seen more momentum on sustainable finance than we've probably seen in the last decade. And that is really encouraging and a really great platform for us to really kind of think about building proper momentum towards, you know, the planetary emergency. So it's quite exciting and a great base from which to build.
Well, thanks, Ray. Now, before we show the film, I'd like to hear a little bit about the motivation from WWF. Why did you make such quite an amazing film, I have to say, congratulations. But why did WWF choose this topic? What was the trigger, and what do you hope to accomplish by producing this film and showing it tonight and other nights?
Yeah, great question, Gail. And we have various versions, of course, the full version being, I think, 43 minutes, which I do encourage everyone to watch. But also the version you're seeing today, I believe, and a shorter one. But yeah, to your question, Gail, it was inspired from the original Netflix Our Planet series. And with Netflix and Silverback Films, this is our second film aimed at a specific business audience. So the first one being towards the business audience. And then this one originated from the finance sector saying, you know, what does this mean? What does Our Planet messaging and, you know, the whole framing mean for the finance sector? And can you create something bespoke for the sector? Which we thought was actually great timing, because we're now seeing some momentum. The conversations entered boardrooms, but I think from our perspective, what we haven't seen is actions that are in line with the science. You know, nature rising to the same level as climate change, and action in this decade that will actually help us achieve our climate and nature targets, which is why we made the film. We tried to come up with 5 key messages. It's really meant to inspire action in line with the science, because we don't have endless time. And it's trying to move the entirety of the finance sector. So this is not about 1 or 2 green products on the side or window dressing. We really need to change the way the finance market operates in order to affect global business and to affect the planet. And the finance sector has a massive role to play. It's obviously not a silver bullet, and you know, business and government and regulation needs to play a role. But the film speaks to what the finance sector can do, and we've already seen some really good take-up, ideas generated, you know, new product development off the back of the film. And you know, trying to influence some of the big decisions out there in terms of capital flow. So it's an exciting time, and I think, you know, that's the reason we made it, and we really hope to affect some of the decisions that can you know, change the world for the better going forward.
Well, it's a pretty worthy cause, I have to say. Before you leave us, one last question, which is a fast one. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hopeful are you?
Yeah, it depends on the day, I guess.
How about we do today, Earth Day?
Yeah, on today, I would say a 6, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think there's lots going on, both in business sustainability and in the finance sector. But I think what I'm really interested in is the actions we need this decade. Because if we tip into new normal post 2030, then we have a big problem. And all of our guesses are anyone's guess really as to what happens. So this film is trying to address the idea of what needs to be done this decade, meaningful action now. And I think all the initiatives and actions we're seeing on this big wave that's only going in one direction, what we need to see is that aligned to the science. So for instance, to give a concrete example, we know we need to have emissions by 2030. That needs to nest within an overall net zero by 2050 goal. And that means action today that will get us there. And that includes the finance sector as well. So it is a bit daunting when you consider what needs to be done according to the science, but humanity is capable of a lot if we really focus on it, and are ambitious, help each other and work together, and are not kind of sidelined by going down rabbit holes, but instead focusing on the big prize. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but there's a lot of work to do, and we need all of you to help.
Thank you so much, Ray. And thank you so much for making the film. Audience members, what I'd suggest is you think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hopeful you are. Make sure that you ask the questions in the chat box so that we can see if our finance guests, after we watch the film, can help move us up and make us more hopeful by the end of this event. Thanks, Ray. Over to you, Emma. We'll show the film. That is a inspiring trailer that identifies, I think, a tremendous amount of problems, but also opportunities that we hope the finance sector can actually rise to. I'm delighted now to actually go to the main part of today's event, which is really to welcome 5 world-class panelists, both from the industry, the financial sector, and from academics. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves first, and to tell us what is their area of expertise and one fun or not so fun fact about finance and sustainability. Asking each of them at this point to stick to 1 minute. I'm going to be pretty tough on the moderation here because we need to get through into the details. Bevis, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, the pressure's to be quick on the draw with the unmute button then. So I'm Bevis Watts. I'm Chief Exec of Triodos Bank in the UK. Triodos are pioneers of sustainable finance for 40 years. And we try to be a reference point for using money to be a positive force for good, and have founded the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, which is a collective of like-minded banks. And also founded the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which tries to come up with a common methodology as to how we can all understand our carbon footprint and address it. And I know Federated Hermes are also very involved in that and leading that in the UK. So you'll hear, no doubt, more comments on that. So, and I'm 20 odd years a sustainability professional in different guises. So that's a bit about me. The sad fact is that since the Paris Accord was signed, banks globally have continued to invest $3.8 trillion into fossil fuels, and it's gone up every year since the Paris Accord was signed, except 2020 when it went marginally down. So we have a huge amount to do still. And the fun fact is that Richard Curtis, the filmmaker, maker of Love Actually and many things, is a Triodos customer, but he's also the founder of a campaign called Make My Money Matter. So if you're interested in changing pension funds and what's happening there, and declarations that are being made around Make My Money Matter and net zero, then check out that campaign.
Yeah, Richard Curtis is fantastic with everything he's been doing with the global goals. I'm also a Triodos customer with Arctic Base Camp, my not-for-profit. So that's a good thing. Now, Ewan, over to you. Tell us who you are and fun or not so fun fact.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Gail. I'm Johan Murray. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Federated Hermes International. We are a leading responsible investment manager, probably best known for our engagement and stewardship work, including in the area of biodiversity and ecosystem loss. My fun or not so fun fact, I'll let you decide, about finance and sustainability relates to a panel that I was recently on. At the end of the session, we were asked for our one innovative technology that would really shift the dial for climate change. I was with two other colleagues from the industry. They answered very sensibly. One went for nuclear fission, one went for hydrogen, and I said the whale. And everybody looked at me a bit odd. And I said, well, you know, these creatures, not only are they great sequesters of carbon in their own right, but what they do to phytoplankton, even a 1% phytoplankton productivity increase is roughly worth the sudden appearance of 2 billion mature trees. So there's my fact.
That is a fun fact. That is a fun fact. That is excellent. Maureen, welcome on board.
Thank you, everyone. So Marine de Basler, I'm based in Paris, working in sustainability for 20 years and for 16 years within Hsbc, head of sustainability for France, then Europe, and for 4 months now, group advisor on natural capital, which is actually good news. I mean, I don't know if it's a fun one, but it's a good one to see that the financial institutions such as Hsbc are actually appointing staff to have a comprehensive view, not only on climate, which is a long-standing issue, but on nature. And on that not so fun fact is actually one of the NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is a network of central banks that are working together to determine green policies going forward, has actually recently commissioned a study with Inspire to better understand the impact of biodiversity loss on the financial stability. And Majun, which is the chair of the NGFS research work stream based in China, actually said on that of systemic importance, but poorly understood, is the impact of biodiversity loss on the economy and the financial system. So a lot to do still ahead of us.
A lot to do. I agree. A lot to do. Tim, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Gail. Hi, everybody. My name's Tim Lenton. I'm a professor in climate change and Earth system science, and I direct something called the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter. I was one of the co-authors of the so-called Planetary Boundaries Framework, and some people might have heard of the work I've done identifying climate tipping points and raising the alarm on those. But really, at the moment, I'm focusing my energy on trying to identify the positive tipping points that can accelerate the transformation that we all need. And the 8-minute video succinctly summarizes. And the most entertaining thing anyone said to me yet from the financial sector, and they didn't mean it to be funny, was we were in a meeting, somebody said, oh, but we only manage $100 trillion of capital. There's another $400 trillion of capital that we don't manage. And I was just like, as if you needed any more to actually fundamentally change the world as we know it and get us to a happy, healthy, sustainable future. You only need a tiny fraction of that 100 trillion, mate, is what I said back.
Exactly. There is a lot of money out there circulating. Absolutely. Ben, can you introduce yourself and then we'll kick off?
Hello, yeah, my name's Ben Groom. I'm the Dragon Capital Chair of Biodiversity Economics at the University of Exeter and the Exeter Business School. I guess my work basically is up until now has been on climate change and biodiversity, but in particular on the intergenerational effects and how do we bring future generations to the table in making decisions, be they investment decisions or public policy decisions. My not so fun fact, I suppose, is that there are still, and I get these facts from the Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, by the way, in case anyone's interested in sources, that there are between $4 and $6 trillion of subsidies going towards activities which are harmful to biodiversity still in the world. So not only does biodiversity in general receive a zero price in all of our transactions? There are also subsidies to the detriment of biodiversity. Fun fact, also from Dasgupta Review, is that around 60% of the cures for cancer have come from the diversity found in soil, in fungi and bacteria. So biodiversity is wide and important on all different levels.
Thank you, Ben. That is good to recall and good to remember. If I can ask all the panelists to switch their microphones on. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to start off by having an open discussion as if we were all in the room together, which of course we're not. We're in multiple different rooms, multiple different locations. Maureen, your location of Paris is probably the one we all wish we could go to safely again. But my question, and let's have a conversation. What's your reaction? The film is beautiful. We saw the beautiful clip. Many of us have seen the actual film itself. And obviously, we've got experts in the room that are working in the industry. We've got, world-class scientists, Tim and Ben. What's your reaction? There's 5 actions and it all looks beautifully put together. Thanks Netflix and thanks WWF. But is this just sort of a happy story, a line for the future? What are our reactions here? And just kick it off, and I'll moderate as we need.
I mean, maybe if I can start. I mean, we're not starting from nowhere. There's a lot of positive engagement, and I think it's increasing, and it's one of the positive outcome of the COVID-19, I would say. I mean, it's worth noting that yesterday the Glasgow Financial Alliance for net zero has been launched with 160 firms that are responsible for assets over 70 trillion that all actually committed to net zero. I mean, which makes me say to my executive committee this morning that net zero is becoming mainstream. I mean, if it's becoming mainstream within the financial industry, it's going to be a game changer. Doesn't mean that it's going to go overnight, because it would have so much social impact that no one would want that. But yes, we're going to track, we're going to work, and thanks to those to have worked on the PCAF and other methodology, yes, I think it's great news and it's worth noting.
Thank you. Maureen, is HSBC one of the companies that has signed up, or is that currently under discussion?
Absolutely, and HSBC has actually committed to be net zero last October, and more than having committed to do that, we have played a leading role. Our CEO, Noel Quinn, has actually led the Sustainable Market Initiative of the Prince of Wales, dedicated to net zero for 9 of the 11 biggest banks to actually sign up for this engagement. So yes, we have been instrumental, I can say it.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's certainly movement. I think the announcement yesterday with the US and UK governments was a very, very good one. And we had Nigel Topping, who of course is part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance. We had him as an earlier keynote guest for one of our earlier Exeter online events. But other reactions, I mean, barriers are and enablers to this kind of stuff. Lots of great statements. Mark Carney is going to be chairing the Glasgow Financial Alliance. It's got lots of big names. U.S. administration is different than it was this time last year. So, but it's a big hill to climb. So.
Yeah, I thought his soundbite that we're going to turn an existential risk into the greatest commercial opportunity of our time. Well, that's one of the best. That's a brilliant soundbite, but it does sound too good to be true. And it sort of, frankly, I think it's like a suspension of critical thinking, if I can be blunt. I mean, you can't. The same drivers that have caused the existential risk are still going to solve it without some other rethinking. I think the film then was a little bit more accurate in saying, hold on a minute, it needs a bit deeper work than that, and that there needs to be a systems view, there needs to be joined up action across sectors, we need to reframe ideas of value, and we, as it put it near the end, we need to build a new system. In other words, the same system that gave us the existential risk isn't going to magically solve the problem it caused. So what happens though is those of us on the coalface, and we're all on the coalface of this in different ways, and I shouldn't use that metaphor, of course, because that's the worst possible one to choose, but basically we look at each other and we look around and we see actors paralyzed by that complexity, when actually a sector like finance has enormous leverage and agency to be a trigger of change, and change then can unfold in the complex societal system in unpredictable but exciting ways. So for me, what we've got to work on together is have the confidence that there are positive tipping points out there. We've seen them with getting coal burning out of UK power generation, with the uptake of electric vehicles in Norway. There are many more we could create. We need to see that kind of non-linearity and complexity actually as an opportunity. We need to stop being scared by complexity, and we need to be doing all this with our eyes open that that's a way into the problem, but eventually it will be changing our paradigms and our ideas of value. But if you try to come in, as Donella Meadows taught us 40 years ago, if you try to come in to change the paradigm, you won't get anywhere. So that's what I took away, Gail.
Yeah. So what do you think, Bevis? Is the paradigm changing? You're a banker. Obviously, you're the chief executive of a innovative bank, but is it really changing, or is it changing fast enough?
Yeah, I mean, my own reaction to the film, and well, obviously, I'm very grateful to WWF for creating a film where I'm in it, and David Attenborough. So I'll sleep, easy for the rest of my life, I think, and always buy them a drink. But I mean, it was a hugely positive thing for someone who's worked in this area for a while, that the kind of concepts are becoming mainstream. But really, it's 15 years plus since the concept of stranded assets first came about. And it will only really be 2025 in the UK where we have climate risk regulation starting to bite. So we're in the very early stages of this, and all of the pledges being made and everything is great. But we need to establish an awful lot for that to have real integrity. Common methodologies for how we're going to baseline carbon footprint, how we're going to report, and everybody globally should be using the same methodologies and reporting standards. So we've got confidence in that. But just regulating banks for climate risk is not going far enough. We should be thinking of regulating banks for net zero now. And I would argue beyond that, it was great to hear Maureen mention social impacts as well, because if banks were totally myopic on achieving net zero, a lot of them could do a huge amount in a short space of time through divestment, through pivoting, moving assets off balance sheet, or even setting very high exclusions and perhaps not financing residential mortgages on some of the poorer households that have very inefficient properties. And all those behaviours, I'm convinced, will actually come to pass unless we really think about regulating banks more holistically. And I'm convinced we're on a journey, we're in the foothills of a journey to realise we have to really think through, as Tim was saying, the system and the paradigm, and think more vocationally about the role of banks in society, and seek to think about how we align them to the Paris Accord more generally and to Sustainable Development Goals. And that's why we were also involved in founding the UN Principles for Responsible Banking, which seek to do that.
Right. And we need to move faster. I mean, I think we need to be on a journey, but giddy up, we've got to go a lot faster. Johan, let's go over to Federated Hermes. What's your reaction to the film, and just your idea of, what are the barriers that we have to overcome?
Well, Gail, it was lovely to be reminded of a wet, soggy morning in Bristol, when I took my children up to hear Greta Thunberg speak at a climate protest. Apologies to their school for missing that morning. But the second thing, and maybe more important, is to question whether our financial system is actually fit for purpose in its current state. And I'm just not convinced that it is. So the film talks about externalities, and those in essence represent market failure. And as Tim said, how can we possibly think about using the system in its current space without drastic change to fix that mess? The other thing that struck me was I think we should be honest that the pandemic was in some sense a warning signal of what's going to come. And I think we could probably respond reasonably well to the coronavirus because it's felt so personal and intimate. Whereas to some extent, climate change, biodiversity loss, they all feel a little bit distant and remote from us. And unless we collectively change our attitude, I think there's a risk that will hinder us on a personal level from taking the action that we need to right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, we have to sort of look at both the local, the individual, and the global at the same time. But I am worried about the response on COVID, not the ingenuity from a health perspective. I think that's been fantastic, particularly here with the vaccine rollout. I guess what I'm worried about with the government response globally is that very, very far too small of those new investments on COVID economic recovery are putting us on the green trajectory. The vast majority of them are business as usual or going backwards. And we can see that throughout all the countries. And I have a concern with that because that's a once in a generation type of investment. And it is not low carbon compliant. It is absolutely not. There's good data showing that. Now, Ben, over to you. What did you think of the film? It talks climate, of course, but you brought in biodiversity. So what's your perspective?
Well, I'm sort of a little bit torn by it. I sort of agree with my colleagues to a great extent. I mean, just for instance, I was wondering the editorial process that led to the word unwittingly being used more or less in the first 30 seconds of the film. The financial sector has unwittingly contributed to X, Y, Z sort of disaster. And in fact, I don't think that is true. I think that in many cases, they've had their wits about them. They've known exactly, the financial sector has known exactly what it's doing. The first Earth Summit was in 1992, and that's when the sort of Convention on Biodiversity was signed. These things have been known for years. It's taken a very long time for us to get to this point. So that's quite sort of the cynical devil on my shoulder there. On the other side, one has to look at this film and say it is absolutely remarkable now that we are at this stage where the sort of major financial institutions, people like Mark Carney and so on, are now on board with this. But one has to be realistic, I think, about where this process is at in terms of the outcomes, and we're really just concerned about the outcomes rather than the chat and the ambitions, I suppose. And that's where we're not. I agree with Bevis and you, and that we're not quite there yet. And so I think that's really what it is. I think the point is now is that for every enlightened investor that we see, an enlightened member of the financial community that we saw in the film and are here and so on, there are sort of 10 other investors who are not like that, and that's the point, I think, is that we still need to be leaning into the wind here with regard to changing the financial sector. It's not going to happen just from the demand side. So it's not going to happen just because I and some of my friends are interested in investing in biodiversity related stuff. I thought the film was good in the sense that it came back to the regulatory side and was very strong on the regulatory side. So thinking about liabilities, thinking about rules and targets for biodiversity and climate. So that's my sort of potted
I agree very much with you. I think the word unwittingly is debatable. We also see that even with we get the Larry Fink letter, and that's great. But inside BlackRock, of course, they still have fossil fuel investments as well. So there's this disconnect, or at least there's the journey's not finished, and we have to get that journey much faster, going much faster. So if I ask the panelists and again, let's starting with the people working in the field, what is like the one or two things that you think absolutely would be a game changer? So, okay, we've got yesterday's announcement. We've got a Glasgow Financial Alliance that is kicking off, going to hopefully really make sure that the financial community pushes forward at COP26. But on top of that, there's lots more. So what are the one or two things that you really think could be game changers to help your community just move faster? Maureen, what would you say if I put you on the hot seat first?
Yeah. Actually, listening to you are all talking about the regulatory environment. We need stronger regulation. I mean, we are all in a virtual circle where we take engagement, and we need companies to change, and we need behaviors to change, and we need regulation to accompany, etc. So we need stronger regulation, and I would say even more now on nature. I mean, climate, I think we have pushed a lot. We need to deliver, and nature is still nascent, I would say. And also another game changer for us, for our industry, would be for our clients to invest only in the products that are sustainable that we sell. You know, there's still a mixed demand around that, and it's not. I mean, nothing is simple. It's not finance who is not doing his job. It's like the entire ecosystem that needs to be more tight and doing its job.
Great. Ewan, over to you. What are the game changers you're hoping for?
Well, I'm going to suggest maybe a couple for you, Gail. So right now we've got governments and corporates, and they're all coming out with these net zero commitments and pledges. Absolutely wonderful. Nod to Ben in the biodiversity world. How about they come up with some nature transition pathways that they will also follow alongside these net zero emissions targets? How on earth are we going to do it? How are we going to finance it? Well, that's my second one. It's dead easy. All we need to do is for every single bond issuance from now on to be sustainably linked to those promises that the government and corporate have made. It'll be cheaper for the issuers, cheaper for government, and I will be delighted as an investor to accept a lower rate of interest, knowing that the society and the planet is getting saved at the same time.
Wow. Wow. We're recording this, Ewan, you know that, right?
Yeah, I may have said that before too, so it's okay.
It's okay. Okay. Bevis, what are your game changers?
Well, I mean, I could give you boring answers like setting stronger red lines on what we can no longer do, like financing deforestation and all that. But I
like those. I like those.
Yeah, but I want to give you some context as to what these pledges and science-based targets really mean, because that will be game-changing. It's just most of the institutions that have made pledges don't realise it. So we have published for several years the carbon footprint of our loan book, and it shows it's very low intensity in terms of its carbon footprint. And I sit on the board representing all the country managers that's overseeing our own science-based target setting and pathways, and we won't be waiting till 2050 and hope to announce something quite challenging ahead of COP. But if you really think what net zero means when you've already got an incredibly low intensity portfolio in that respect, it means you are not going to get everything decarbonised. So you have to be investing in things that sequester carbon. And that means regenerative agriculture, sustainable forestry, and biodiversity gain through nature-based investments. And when people start to realise that, I think we need to be putting 5% of our entire portfolio into nature restoration schemes. So that's why we've been leading 4 pilots in the UK with the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Environment Agency and the Esme Fairbairn Foundation to try and create new models where people are putting money in, whether that's water companies or insurance companies, to secure ecosystem services and resilience and economic value in return for multi-million-pound investment in landscape scale restoration, whether that's peatland restoration, reforestation, coastal realignment. But that would be the one thing that we could all recognise as a community, that unless we can invest credibly in nature and find new mechanisms for doing it, none of us are ever going to get to net zero.
Yeah, but it's not, I totally agree with you, but it's not that easy. So scientists quickly, I know it's way too difficult to do this quickly, but I want to get to audience questions. It's tricky to get rigorous science into the corporate boardroom. It's tricky. You're both scientists. What is the game changer that you would like to have happen to make those science-based targets much more operationable and accountable?
Well, very quickly, I think, and I think people say in the financial sector and in business would agree, is that they want some, certainly with regard to biodiversity, for instance, they want some clear metrics about what their targets are. How do we measure this, and are we doing well? So those companies and those financial institutions that are into this, that's what they're missing. And there are options out there, but there's not so much coordination. And I think there needs to be some coordination on things like that, like there is on sort of national income accounting and so forth. That would help.
Thank you, Tim.
I think we need to be evaluating performance on deeds, not words, and that applies to government as well as the financial sector. I think the lived reality at the moment is there's a lot of pledges and a lot of words, but sometimes they're coming out of the mouth of companies or organizations. If you look at their deeds, they're quite completely to the contrary of what they're saying, and we have to judge on action on this issue and not on rhetoric.
I agree. I agree. I also think we need to get science-based targets into the securities exchange commissions around the world. I think that would be a very important thing if that was a requirement for filing with certain, especially the big securities exchange commissions. That would be quite a driver. Now, audience, I think we've answered some of your questions that are in the chat box, but there's a few that I'm going to share right now. So I'm going to read two at a time, and then if people can just sort of speak to them. So one question we have is, do you think that there will always be substantial investment in environmentally damaging products in sectors, including new ones like Bitcoin, in the next 10 years? So really, I think that's a question of hope. Where is the balance going to go? Do you think there's always going to be damaging, or can we change that? Followed by, which bank should I be trusting to invest my savings in? And you can't say your own. No, you can, of course. Go ahead, of course. HSBC was fast off the mark on that, yeah.
On the which banks, I would encourage people to look at things like Ethical Consumer Magazine, on their pension funds, the Make My Money Matter campaign, and take an independent view, because there's lots of sustainable options and you can see how banks are rated independently. So I'd go and look at reference sites like that.
Good question. But what about, do we think, panelists, do we think that there's always going to be too much investment into those fossil fuel driven, those sort of bad sectors? How hopeful are we, Tim?
I mean, I think the crucial point here is, I mean, I'm not in the investment sector and not an investor, but you want to invest in what the sectors or the things that are growing. And what we've manifestly seen in recent years is spectacular exponential growth of offshore wind, solar PV. We've seen what I call positive tipping point dynamics, electric vehicles in Norway. It's a revolution that's spreading across the world as we speak. And those are so it's the transformations out of the previous or the incumbent way of doing things powered by fossil fuels to the new way of doing things powered by renewable energy. It's those things where the big growth and the non-linear change in the tipping points are happening. And if you're smart, if I was minded to care about more about money and investment, that's where I'd be putting my money, and I'd know that I would then be participating in triggering that positive tipping process.
Thank you.
So Gail, I was going to take a risk, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to suggest that Tim Lenton was wrong. He's described himself as not an investor, but of course he is, because he has a pension fund, he's an elector, he's a taxpayer, so he can make change, no question of it. Listen, when it comes to brown industry, which is what we're talking about here, our role would be to say, look, unless we believe that that industry is capable of change and we can engage with that industry to make them go faster, we're out. But of course, the risk of getting out is that somebody else will step in. One of those other 9 managers that Ben talked about, who may be less scrupulous. And let's be honest, that will potentially, it simply allows those banks to continue, those companies to continue with the brown activity and not transition fast enough to green.
I would say that we can still say no. We can still have strong sector policies. We do. And yes, we take the risk that others will finance them. But at the end, the peer pressure will be so strong that there's not going to be any business case anymore on those ones. Are we going to stop financing bad stuff? It's very Manichaean. I mean, we don't know what is going to be the bad stuff coming up. I mean, there's going to be other bad stuff coming up. And talking about wind and solar, for a while, it was a bad investment. I mean, some did invest and lost a lot of money. Then it was a good one for the climate. And it's because some lost that now some get money out of it. I mean, it's a difficult game going up. And as you said, I mean, what is brown? I mean, if companies can change, then we need to accompany them. If at the end, the outcome is positive. I mean, most of the economy, the largest part of the economy is in transition. if we only finance the greenest one, I mean, we're not going to finance the entire economy. What we need to do is put pressure on the economy to finance progress.
I do agree with that, but I am so worried about the COVID economic recovery funds that are coming in and the trillions of dollars of investment that are being put in that do not have enough low carbon criteria put beside them, and surprisingly big gaps. I mean, what is the role of government? And does, Rishi Sunak need to have a climate scientist standing beside him when he presents the budget, just like we've seen the value of having medical scientists come into government speeches? I mean, I'm really worried about this. This is a big investment once in a lifetime, and it is not going in the right direction. Tim, I can see you.
Back to politics and regulation.
Yeah, politics and regulation. Exactly. Tim.
Well, I mean, this is a chancellor who doesn't even understand the link between investing in universities, basic research and development as the ultimate engine of economic growth. So for sure, he needs some better advice in the room, and the Treasury's got a long journey to go on, if I can be honest and blunt about it. But other parts of the government are more progressive. If we take a parochial UK perspective, and there are some positive movements and some very bold pledges being issued. But from that parochial perspective, the biggest worry is that, again, it's a lot of words, but it's not a really thought through systemic approach to making the change happen, as you're emphasizing, Gail. But to their credit, the COP26 team do understand systems thinking, and they do understand the huge opportunities, which, by the way, include the fact that, okay, 10% might not be enough to shift the norms in investment, but everything we understand about social change suggests when you get to about a 20% level, you can tip the whole social norms of a community and a sector. So I don't think, the world is a non-linear place. I don't think we should be I don't think we should be totally pessimistic that we couldn't actually be not too far from quite a big tipping point. Yeah.
I agree with you. And we do have hope for Mr. Sunak. He is on the Glasgow Financial Alliance along with many others. So he will certainly have in-depth briefing on exactly this point. More questions. Sorry.
Can I just make a point about, it's a very interesting question about whether or not all activity will be either biodiversity or climate change benign at some point. And personally, I don't think it will be. There'll be offsetting activities. And one of the reasons I say that is because, of course, much of the world is still incredibly poor. And many of these countries may well depend upon fossil fuels for that development process. So in order to not do that, of course, there needs to be sufficient finance for them to change tack and so on. So I think one of the questions that popped up was what would be one of the great outcomes from COP26? And I think one of them would be that there is not just a pledge, but a commitment and actual transfer of funds to developing countries, as was promised in sort of 2009 COP, whatever that was, COP19 or whatever.
Absolutely. Let's take some more questions from the audience. There's people on the call. They're young people looking at their career path. They think finance might be fun, but they also want to make a difference. What's your advice to them? Ewan, let's start with you.
Yeah, go for it. Finance is changing fast and rapidly. Sustainable finance is the thing to be in at the moment. If you want to work on the sort of research and innovation side, you get to talk to Ben and Tim on a fairly regular basis, as our innovation lab people do. You can be an engager, so you can go and talk to corporates about changing their behavior. So there's lots of really good, interesting paths in investment. Go for it.
Go for it. Maureen, Bevis, do you agree? Is this a
same thing? Yes, definitely go for it. And what are the paths to go there? I mean, two things: or you get a financial background and then degree in sustainability. I mean, that's highly valuable. Or you come into the financial institution, and anywhere there's going to be opportunities. I mean, and you can change from inside. So yes,
can I add
for it, definitely.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Can I add that so the pathway I've seen in this in this direction has been from finance into environmental economics post-crisis, post-2008 crisis. Suddenly everybody in finance was thinking that they needed to make a difference, so they moved into environmental economics. And that I used to run a degree program. So if you want to go straight for the finance, make sure there's a sustainable finance center within your business school. And there's one of those in Exeter, isn't there?
Oh, well, there you go. There's a plug. There's a plug. And I would add to that if you are in any educational course, put pressure on your faculty members to mainstream climate change and biodiversity and nature-based solutions. This is not a side issue. This is mainstream, and not everybody is teaching it as mainstream. So put pressure everywhere. I say you're also a consumer, so to speak, of education. So I've got quickly 2 questions here that I'm gonna add in, and then we're gonna have to do closing statements. Maybe I'll only give one question here, and this is a broader question. I think, what are each of you, and this is to the bankers and finance people in the Zoom, what are you doing to try and get your institution and the sector away from fossil fuel? Like, really, where do you really see those things that are dragging? So what are each of you personally doing, if you can disclose that? Maureen, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. First of all, we have policies in place, sector policies, to get out of fossil fuels and start with coal. And we're going to have a new resolution from our next AGM on that. That's the first thing. What I do personally is that I actually push the bank in 2015 to evaluate the alignment of our loan book to a 2-degree scenario. Now it's 1.5, but at that time, Paris Agreement was for 2 degrees. And coming up with the results, showing my executive committee how we aligned or not with it, was actually a great way for them to think it over. How do we change that? How should it be included into the risk framework, etc.? So that was my contribution.
Thank you, because it's hard.
And certainly training.
Thank you, because it's difficult. Bevis, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of an odd question, because we've never financed fossil fuels. I mean, we don't just set minimum standards. We have to finance things that demonstrate positive environmental, social, and cultural impact. And we publish every loan and investment that we make, so people can be the judge of that. So it's an odd question for me to feel in that respect. But maybe just to connect previous questions, I think what I've just described is, we hope, moral leadership in banking. And I think we've talked a lot about politics and regulation changing the system, but actually we need moral leadership at this time, and real standout leadership. So people who are interested in entering sustainable finance, who care about these issues, we need you. Whether you have degrees or not, we need to be more inclusive and invite you into every sinew of the bank, because we need those champions. So yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. That's why I have some of my banking at Triodos. Ewan.
Yeah, if I may be slightly greedy, I'm going to go for 2, but I'll be quick. So the 2 things I'm most proud of that we've done recently are, one, to set up an innovation laboratory within the firm that works with Tim and Ben. So an opportunity for us to learn from science, because in investment, we need their expertise. The second thing that I'm really proud of is our joining up to a partnership group, an open source climate that allows us in a non-commercial way to share ideas, because there's no chance we're going to solve this on our own. We have to do it collectively.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we're getting very close to finishing our time, and I wanted to thank everybody on this call. I could go on for another half an hour or so, but I'm sure that not everybody has that much time. I'm going to have one closing question for each of you as we leave this. And, I think it comes down to hope. And as we move out of the pandemic and rebuild, and as we look forward to COP26, what gives you hope? And let's start with you, Ben.
Well, I mean, who would have thought 6 months ago that the US administration would suddenly be taking the lead, global leadership in terms of climate change. And that I find, I always expected that the Biden administration, if it got in, would do something more than Trump, because one couldn't do less, right? But I didn't realize that the volte face would be so dramatic and systematic from the very, very beginning. So I think that leadership at COP26 is absolutely crucial. The UK, of course, has many governments have shown leadership in this area over the past sort of 15 or so years. I think that is what Tim would definitely refer to as a tipping point here. That's going to amalgamate people, galvanize people at COP26. So I'm hopeful for that reason. I think it's quite impressive.
Thank you, Ben. Ewan, what gives you hope?
Well, like you, Gail, I'm really worried that so much of the finance post-pandemic that should have gone into a green recovery has not, but really heartened that I read the other day that the IMF and the World Bank, and this goes back to an issue that Ben raised a minute ago, that they are considering releasing some of the debt owed to them by emerging markets in return for improvements on emission. What a great way to help deal with the inequality of the system that already exists.
Thank you. Maureen, what gives you hope?
Last year in June, Hsbc announced a joint venture with Pollination to be leader in natural capital asset class. That was a bet, I would say. Now, the joint venture is working on 2 funds that should be launched by the end of this year, one on nature-based solutions solely, and the other one on carbon offsets from nature. And the ambition is for 6 billion, and it's for institutional. And the demand on those are so high that it gives me hope, yes.
Thank you. Tim, what gives you hope?
Well, the knowledge that the world is a complex adaptive system, including the human world, where sometimes a small change does result in a big difference. And those positive tipping points are what we need, but we're seeing evidence of them. Who would have thought 9 years ago, when 40% of the electricity in the UK was generated from coal power, that today it would be nearly zero? Or who would have thought just a few years ago that well over half the cars being sold in Norway are fully electric, battery electric vehicles? And that's just the beginning, folks. I mean, we saw hints in the video about plant-based meat substitutes, etc., etc. We've talked, Bevis was very eloquent about the potential for regenerative nature investment to be a win-win. The world, these things have become self-propelling. So we look at each other and we are saying, oh, I'm not sure if the sector can move things or not. This thing will happen, will start to happen by itself. And we saw that with Greta Thunberg and the climate movement. Those reinforcing feedbacks are strong, and we need them. We can do our part in triggering them, but once we get them going, they have their own momentum.
I agree. Bevis, what gives you hope?
Well, there are lots of givens on this planet, but the financial system isn't one of them. It's man-made. And I hope we're really waking up to realize that we can change that paradigm and that system that isn't serving us. And that my hope is that everybody starts to really realize and own the decisions they make about where they spend, save, and invest their money, because we have way more power than we think to influence the institutions. And I think the generational shift we're seeing gives me huge hope in that respect.
Well, that concludes this Earth Day event for the University of Exeter. I hope that the audience, you feel that you've got a little bit more hope than you might have had last year anyway. I can't say that you've got more hope before we had our event. That's a pretty fast shift. I have to say in closing, of course, thanks to all of my guests for being so honest about what they're doing and enthusiastic and inspiring me. And to say what gives me hope is these types of conversations and real collaboration across sectors and individuals. And we've got all kinds of people working on this. And the US administration, of course, having its climate summit this week gives me a tremendous amount of hope. So thanks to everybody and happy Earth Day.